Nice. Thank you very much. I was thinking about it. I started this project last year, and I had people that I really respect in the sports field, martial arts in particular. I asked some coaches that worked in the field for many years, and it's interesting because I mean it ties up into what we're going to talk about, but yeah, this relationship between like a mentor and a mentee, like I feel like it was really prevalent back then, me personally, I work in a restaurant. I'm 16 years old, not too experienced, and like this chef in the beginning, he's like, this guy, he's like so useless. He knows nothing, but eventually he takes you under his wings and he teaches you stuff, and eventually in your career it's gonna happen. But these days, I don't know, it's really like that. But like you're here right now, taking the time to talk to us, and it's very appreciated.
Well, I really appreciate having the opportunity. So the gratitude goes both ways.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And right now you're in Vancouver. I did
Yes.
not think about it really when you told me, but what is it like? Is it like much different than Ottawa? And because like,
Well,
yep.
yeah, Vancouver is the city I grew up in, so I know it quite well. Yeah, it's a very beautiful city on the West Coast. The climate is very different from Ottawa. It's much milder. It rains a lot. The only time you can really be guaranteed to have sunny, warm weather is from between about July 15th and August 15th.
Wow.
So the rest of the time it rains, but we don't get a lot of snow, and it's a very beautiful city. It's very lush and green, and it is home to me. I don't. It's not my ideal city, but I'm familiar with it because I was born here, and I lived here till I was 31, and then I got my first full time job. So yeah,
Nice.
so I like it
It's kind of like Seattle, kind of like rainy.
very much.
Okay.
Absolutely, yeah,
Okay.
identical. Yeah.
Nice. Have you been to the United States a little bit, like a couple of times over
Yeah,
there?
yeah. I've been to Chicago for a conference on men's issues. Been to Hawaii a couple times
Nice.
for a lot of times actually when I was younger with my parents for vacations. I've been to Los Angeles, Seattle certainly, New York City once with
Uh,
my mom when we went on a cruise across the Atlantic. So a bit, but not as much as I'd like to. I'd love to do a driving tour
uh.
all across the United States. That would be neat.
It's really uh, um like this road trips. It's a concept like a North American. Like sometimes Europe, I see like they do that, but I think it's maybe more backpacked. But yeah, there's so many beautiful places in like Canada and the United States. Like if you go to Colorado, there's a beautiful place. And here in Quebec, a lot of people that like I'm going west this summer, and they do Canada. They go up these province. It's pretty sweet. And how much was
Yeah,
was it real different the United States like 30 years ago from now, or it was pretty much the same?
it's an interesting question. I I don't know. I probably don't have enough evidence to really draw a reasonable conclusion, but yeah, and
Yeah.
I liked it then. I still like it now quite a lot. I love driving trips. I mean, it's just such an interesting way of seeing a place. I like the experience of being in a car for a long time. It's like you shut out the world.
Yeah.
I've driven long distances on my own in a car, which is quite an interesting experience. We playing music, you get into kind of a different zone where your thoughts just go all over the place. And I also enjoy being with other people. Sometimes you're silent, sometimes you can get into really deep conversations.
Yeah.
It's a special experience. I think it would be sad if we, like, there seems to be so much animosity towards the automobile now, and ideas, we should all live in 15-minute cities where we don't get outside of our little bubble, and that would somehow
Yeah.
be better for the environment. Well, it may be. I mean, I doubt it, but I think be lost. I love the freedom of the automobile. To me, it is really it's the quintessential sort of North American experience to be able to get in your car and go where you want to go.
Absolutely. Jordan Peterson, I think, said once, the attack on the automobile is really an attack on actually the quintessential uh, item of freedom, because a car is it's a it's what gets you to everywhere basically. Like in North America, it's like the highway system was privileged over the railway system. That might be something that we can debate over the benefits, but the thing is, if you want to drive, you can drive to a lot of places, and it's wherever you want and whenever you want, and there's so many gas station. Like electric car,
Yeah.
it's different.
Yes, yes, I'm not a big fan of the idea of the electric car, at least as it's configured now. I've heard, and I don't know for sure, I've never followed this up, but I've heard that young people today are less interested in driving, that fewer young people have their driver's licenses, for example. And that just strikes me as so bizarre because when I was, 15 and a half, my main goal was to get my driver's license as soon as I turned 16. And that was also the goal of everyone I knew. And so it seems to me a strange indication, perhaps of, I don't know what, I don't know, of a growing passivity or just a different mindset to not be interested in being able to drive oneself and go wherever one wants. So I hope that doesn't. I hope it's not true, and I hope that young people will embrace the opportunities of driving.
Absolutely. I mean, I've heard about people who don't drive by choice, but I've met them like recently, and often it's anxiety, basically the reason why they're not on the roads.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
yeah, there's a lot of interesting trends in this new generation. um,
For
but we
sure.
could,
Yeah.
absolutely. Um, we can start by a introduction. If you want to introduce yourself to our large audience. Um, yep.
Sure, yeah. So I'm Janice Fiamengo, and as I said, I think already, I was born and raised in Vancouver, and I studied English literature at the University of British Columbia. I got my PhD there, and I got my first job at the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon, and I lived there for 4 years. I loved it, and then I got a job at the University of Ottawa, and I moved to Ottawa, and I lived there for I guess 16 or 17 years. Then my husband and I got married, um, and my husband and I moved sort of into the country just south of Ottawa. So we lived between Brockville and Kingston for quite some time along the St. Lawrence River. And then I moved back to Vancouver when I retired in 2019. So I've been living here for the last 5 years.
Nice. Thank you very much. Um, how is the retirement different than what you thought? So basically, did you have expectation? Were you like in the last years where you're like, oh, I'm very excited to retire? Like, how was it?
Yeah, I would say it has met all my expectations. And in fact, it's been exactly as I hoped and thought it would be. And that is that, yeah, I can just really spend every day doing what I love to do. And I always felt when I was teaching that although I enjoyed teaching to a certain extent, I wanted more time to write and to research issues that interested me. And in the last 8 years or so of my teaching career, I became really interested in men's issues and sort of cultural criticism, especially anti-feminist critique. I know we're going to talk about that later, but so I won't get into it yet. But I really, I wanted to delve into that more, and so that's what I've been doing ever since I retired. And I still don't feel like I have enough time in the day to do it, all the things I want to do. There's so many issues I want to write about, and many more things I want to read. I'm so ignorant in so many issues, but yeah, just to know that I can set my own time schedule, and it's a wonderful thing. And I in the last 2 years I started my own Substack newsletter, and so that's where a lot of my energy goes. I try to, write an essay and post it pretty much every 10 days ideally, or maybe even a bit more often if I can. So I'm always thinking about essays I want to write, and I just love that. It's Yeah, it's like it's a dream come true.
Absolutely. And do you have friends or colleagues that enjoy it the same way, or they were like more like in a fishing way of it?
I think, yeah, there are some of my colleagues have like deliberately decided to live somewhere where they can do a lot more outdoor kind of things. But I think like academics, when they retire, they don't tend to want to stop doing what they did, because
Uh,
usually they started doing it because it fascinates them, and that becomes a big part of their identity, their sense of who they are. And so usually I think when academics retire, they keep on doing the thing that they were doing. And they might do it in a slightly different way. Like for instance, they might write a more popular book rather than a strictly academic book because now they can, or they might contribute to journals that are less rigorously scholarly. But usually they kind of keep doing similar sorts of research and work. And that's kind of the case for me. I mean, I don't do as much um, with literature per se. I'm much more interested in men's issues, but I'm still doing, research and things like that.
and it's basically the distinction between a job and a career. So like if you work in a restaurant, it might not be your passion, but if you work in academia, that's really a career. So it's more like something that you would do for free, basically. That's the distinction.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of people feel that way anyway, and that's the ideal, that is the thing you feel like you were born to do. And so a few of us are lucky enough to get paid to do the thing that we would do for free, as you say. So we don't want to stop.
That's very interesting. Like, I've been told like a professor job, maybe it's not like the most paying or whatever, but it has such an impact because you're impacting the future generation. And when you started that job, was it like, did you really felt that across your career, or did you feel like more or less, or about it?
You mean in terms of feeling like I could have an impact? That
Yes.
that sort of thing. Yeah, I did. I mean, I always felt that it was a huge privilege to be able to get paid to talk about books with other people who are interested in books. Like, I mean, I couldn't believe it that, somebody would actually hire me to do that. And at the best, it was just a dream. Like, I remember sitting around a seminar table talking about, well, I did a couple years of a seminar on Jane Austen, who is one of my favorite writers. And I just couldn't believe that I got to sit and talk about Jane Austen with other people who were also reading the exact same book and with some degree of interest. That was the only downside I would say to teaching for me, is because in a way I felt like maybe I loved a lot of the books too much.
Mm.
And some of the students taking the courses didn't love them that much. In fact, some of them probably didn't like them at all. And so, and I had trouble understanding that. Like, I think to be a really effective teacher, you have to step back a bit from your own passion, perhaps, and you have to figure out ways to allow other students to connect with that passion from the particular experiences and the particular mindset that they're approaching the subject from. And I don't think I was very good at that, because I had, like, from the time I was, like, even before I could actually read, I learned to read at quite an early age, probably like I was pretty fluent by 5, I would say. But my parents used to read to me before bed, and I memorized all the books that they read to me, Winnie the Pooh and stuff like that. And like, I just, stories were so entrancing for me. And then once I could read on my own, my mom used to go to the library and bring home a huge stack of books for me to read. And I don't remember ever encountering a book at that age that I didn't enjoy. I just open the page and it's like you go into another dimension where you're not even really aware of your surroundings. You're not even yourself anymore. You're in this world created by the book. And that was such a powerful feeling. And I have to admit, it's not as powerful now. Like, I often start a book and then find myself bored with it and I put it aside and I don't finish it. So I've lost something, some magic that I had when I was younger. But because I had such a powerful experience of that, I was not very sympathetic to students who were bored by the books. And of course, I selected those books because I thought they were excellent. So when a student says, "Oh, I found it so boring, I just couldn't finish it," I wouldn't know what to say to that student. And in fact, I would often feel, you know, resentful is perhaps a too strong a word, but I did not empathize with that. And I once said to a class of students, if you say that the book that you're reading, that you find it boring, and especially if you have that experience over and over again, it's not the book's fault.
Mhm.
And that wasn't maybe I don't think that attitude of mine, the sort of fierce defense of the books, necessarily made me the best teacher. That's my confession.
That's very interesting. There's this expression that uh, bored people are boring. So I kind
That's
of
it.
feel like that. Like if you're like, this is not interesting. Like, what do you want to do? I don't know. And like, this
Yeah,
nothing passionate about nothing. I found like
yeah,
like I always had sport, but yeah, like when I grew up, I was like, oh, I'm passionate about, let's say, whatever, politics or literature. And some people, they're like in between. They're like gray people, and like I don't know, maybe maybe we're crazy, but yeah, sometimes we look at them, we're
yeah.
like, how come you don't have a thing? Like have a thing.
I know. Yeah. I always like I struggled with that. And I think I do think a really good teacher is somebody who can look at that gray student and can figure out ways to help them find a passion. And I did meet a lot of teachers that were just, I think, sincerely and genuinely inspired to help students in that way. And I have to confess, I just wasn't, because I just felt it was such a strange position to be in. Like, I had never been that. I had always known what I loved, and I'd always been able to find things in school or outside of school that really made me so curious and, obsessed even with finding things out and just being interested in the world. And so, yeah, to meet somebody who is at school because they don't know what else to do with themselves, and their parents maybe are paying for them to go to school, or they might be paying themselves but they just have no real interest. I found that very difficult to imagine.
Um,
So
I think, not to be too harsh on these people, like I believe like maybe sometimes like you're very passionate about something, but you get bullied, and maybe bullying was like worse back then, or I don't know. But there's also that's more political, but like um, there's um there's a discourse about uh, accepting everybody's difference and idiosyncrasy, but also we also want everybody to think the same, and yeah, I don't know. But it's very interesting, like the early adoption of books. I've seen like, if you want people to succeed in the future, there's a couple of things like you want to do, and like academic success is, I think, a good predictor in the data for long-term success. And like, how do you make kids love books? Like, it might like, but like I think as a kid, like it's actually more interesting, and you think like, oh, their attention span is shorter, so you can't like uh, transfer that passion. But actually, like they see these images, like this is an elephant, and like these books are very like kind of like toys basically, and like I think it's easier
mhm.
maybe to transfer that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, I certainly my experience of being a child was I just felt like I had an almost endless capacity to be interested, to learn things. My memory was so much better than it is now. My ability to very quickly become immersed in a subject, it was very deep. And my only regret, really, of my own schooling experience was that I wasn't pushed harder. I mean, I liked school, and in general, my schooling experience was positive. But I think I could have done even more and could have learned more if I'd been given even more opportunities, and if the standards had been really high. So yeah, it's also, you were saying about how like there's this kind of discourse of appreciating everyone, but then sort of wanting them all to think the same about things. That is very interesting. But then there's also, I think, this notion that lowering standards generally makes it possible that uh, students who might be weaker or who might struggle will therefore do better. And I don't think it necessarily does. And I think what it ends up doing is meaning that students who have potential that's untapped are never given the opportunity to really achieve what they might be capable of achieving. So I have a bias towards encouraging every student, but also holding every student to the highest possible standard and really challenging students, especially at that young age when I think, their minds are so incredibly flexible and capacious.
Absolutely, and like you said, like it's a privilege, to be in this field, but it's also, I guess, a responsibility, and we, we we probably have a responsibility to find the best people and to put them in their best place, basically, and lowering the standards. I mean, if the data like shows like it might be good, it's like I don't know, but the thing is, again, so I've got to cite Jordan Peterson, but this is a zone of proximal development, and it's just a concept where if you have a capacity of 100%, basically pushing you to 104, 105, where you're challenged enough to pay attention and have growth, but not too much where it's so difficult, where it's past your ability to perform.
Yes. And I always felt that I was not challenged in that way. So that was my one disappointment. And that is the challenge for a good teacher, is to know where that spot is. And it's difficult given the huge diversity of talents and abilities in the ordinary classroom. So
Yeah.
yeah.
But I think so. Basically, I'm 6'6", pretty tall. The world is
Oh
not really
wow.
made. Yes, the world is not made for people who are deviating from the means. So if you're like a high IQ
Mm,
person, you're really interesting in books and school. You're not like the 80%. So how is it navigating through the world where it's like nobody's really like you? I feel like because if you're bored, if you're a 12-year-old and you're like you should be uh, in classes with 14-year-old, it has to be
yes.
bored because you're not just different, you're also better. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
like the real
That's a huge issue. Yes. Uh-huh. And that seems to me an area in which a lot of modern education, I think, falls short. I think sometimes teachers are afraid of those students and even offended by them, because those students are often a handful in the class. They may ask challenging questions. They may disagree with things that the teacher says, especially if the teacher is herself, I could say, or himself, but most teachers, especially in the lower levels, tend to be female now. And they do tend to prefer a fairly compliant group of students. And I think that is a problem for very high IQ young people, especially if that high IQ young person is a male, which, he's more likely to be. And I've known extremely bright men who said that their schooling experience was just miserable because they're mostly female teachers, we're not the least bit interested in helping them develop their intellectual curiosity and their abilities, and actually found them to be a threat in the classroom, and it turned them off academia. And many of them never went on, to higher education, precisely because their experience was so terrible. And I think what an incredible waste of talent and potential. So that is a real issue in our school system today, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just saw like yesterday, I was in a gas station filling my car, and I saw a journal, and the front page was like celebrating 70% doctors are female now in Quebec. And it's interesting because the first thing that I saw was like this is the party of inclusion and everything and
Mm-hmm.
diversity, but then you're supporting not discrimination. I mean, in a sense, it's like inequality. You're supporting actually inequality, like mathematically
Mm-hmm.
speaking. But
Yes.
we
Well, and
know.
it is discrimination too. It is discrimination because those 70% didn't just get there by accident or like through a natural process. They got there through a process by which female students are encouraged and supported and even promoted every step of the way, and male students are not encouraged and not promoted and are actually literally discriminated against, often through lack of access to special programs that exist only for girls, because we're still operating under this idea that girls are discriminated against. So it's a crazy system in which, even though we already know that, since the 1990s, since the mid 1980s, female students have been the majority at colleges and universities across North America. They're still getting all sorts of special attention, and the male students are falling behind, not least because they're told when they're in school that they shouldn't excel, that they are bearing the burden of being male and inheriting some sort of privilege or entitlement that they can't see anywhere around them, but that is allegedly there, and that they should apologize for and take a step back. And on the doctor front, yeah, I think that's uh, incredible. Why should we celebrate that? We wouldn't be celebrating it if the headline was that 70% were male. We'd be talking about how we could encourage more women to go into the profession. And when it comes to doctors, we should have 70% male, as far as I can understand, because female doctors don't tend to want to work the number of hours that a driven male doctor will want to work. They tend to want a greater work life balance. You can read a lot of articles about that. They don't tend to be as interested in going where the work is. So there's a terrible doctor shortage in small towns, in northern towns, in places where female doctors don't want to go, perhaps because they're married and they're already settled somewhere, whereas a male doctor would tend to take his family there. So some of these issues, they're not necessarily the woman's fault, but they still do affect the quality of medical care in our country. So there's certainly, in my opinion, nothing to celebrate about a predominance of female doctors, and many reasons to be very worried about it. Also, I have to say, I think that many female doctors are carry with them a prejudice against men. Many of them are influenced by feminist ideology to believe that men are not, not as morally superior as women are. And many of them have a subtle or not so subtle contempt for their male patients. So I think, yeah, that whole issue is a real problem.
I mean, I saw like the judicial system might have carry like this what is it, contempt uh for men, maybe brought on by a feminism, but in the medical system I never I didn't think about it. But yeah, it's very interesting, this discussion, because on one point some people will declare like all they want is equality, but at the same time they'll actually
Yeah.
celebrate inequality, and that's very interesting.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, the contradiction is so glaring, and yet it exists everywhere in the culture. There's nothing equal about declaring that women's concerns, women's needs, women's perspectives should be at the forefront of all discussions, while men's concerns, men's needs, and men's perspectives are toxic and should be kept at the back. Just recently, I've been reading a lot about uh, the fuss that feminist teachers or female teachers are making about the boys in their classrooms who are not interested and are beginning to push back against feminist indoctrination, because a lot of boys are tired of hearing about their own second class status, and they're tired of the various types of social indoctrination that their teachers are giving them. And so some of them are responding with resistance. Some of them are, have gone online and are very interested in what somebody like Andrew Tate or, somebody along the same lines is saying about masculinity. And these teachers now are very vehement about shutting these boys down and not allowing them to have various perspectives, not allowing them to argue in the classroom for their position. And that, I think, is, I mean, it just shows that what has happened has nothing to do with equality. Why do we have a school system in which we have boys being taught almost entirely by female teachers? Certainly in the primary grades, and even up into the higher grades, there's many more female teachers than male, and it's understandable why, because teaching is a very difficult profession for a male. He's liable to be accused of some kind of, sexual harassment or sexual misconduct. He's vulnerable at all times to that kind of a complaint, where in a way that a woman isn't, although women are not immune to sexually harassing and sexually abusing their students. Yet somehow we have the idea that female teachers are not going to do that kind of thing. And a lot of boys don't want to be taught by a female teacher, or at least not predominantly by female teachers. Many boys are looking for male role models, sometimes because they've grown up without a father. Sometimes because that's just the way boys are. I think there is something natural in boys wanting male role models. And so, not only to have a female teacher, but to have a female teacher who is insisting that he has to accept feminist indoctrination in the classroom is intolerable for a lot of boys. And yet, there's no recognition that there's something quite natural about boys' resistance to that. So, yeah, that's it's an interesting issue. I don't think, I don't think the passage towards female supremacism, which a lot of feminists believe in, even if they pretend that they care about equality, I don't think that passage is going to be easy, because I think more and more boys have had enough of the indoctrination. At least I hope that's true, because I certainly support them in their resistance. I don't
So
know whether you had that experience in school. I mean, you're a very young person, so I don't know whether you can speak to that.
I think it's I feel like I was in the perfect time to be born, where it's like in between two generation, where the young people are really like, it's straight up at the school. It's like, hey, you're too rambunctious. You're too playing around. You should be like this Jennifer. She's quiet and like she doesn't do too many problems. So, but as a young people, it's I would say so. I would say so. Like you could see like the studious girl who's 15 years old, who's trying to become a neurosurgeon. She's really encouraged. She's really helped and celebrated. And the guy, it's like, hey, be in the back of the class. Don't make too much
Yeah,
problems. But I think it has exponentially worsened. And because it's really
yeah,
like I think Warren Farrell talked about it, the author of The Boy Crisis and many other books, which I
yes,
recommend to listen to and to read. He talks about like basically like if one gender wins, the other will lose, and it's like, well, everybody loses because you can't just have just half of the population like having a higher suicide rate. They're like they falling behind, and like if half of like it doesn't work. I mean, but
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah. I had a friend who his son is about maybe 8 years older than you are. He's in his early 20s now, and he went to high school in Kingston. And when on the graduation day, my friend attended his son's graduation, and he said like 90 96 or to 98% of all the awards given out went to the female students.
Yeah.
And like he couldn't believe it. It was incredible, just girl after girl after girl, the boys just sitting there. And he said the boys were kind of like they recognized it. It was weird. And they kind of laughed about it a little bit, but he said it was just shocking, the inequality. And mostly female teachers calling up the female students, and it was like they were the only students that were really considered to matter. Like, so yeah, I mean, and I do think that like that female centeredness and the just the dismissiveness about boys' achievement or boys' feelings or attitudes, it is baked into a lot of women, young and old, and they have this sense that like they might even know that that's what's going on, that there's a bias against boys in school, but they feel it's justified because they think that we've had this history where allegedly girls and women were kept down and were left out and weren't allowed to do things, which that's a whole other issue. It isn't,
Yeah.
that's not true either. But even if it were true,
Yeah.
that up until 50 years ago or 30 years ago or whatever they want to say, that girls and women were prevented from following their dreams and pursuing professions, it still wouldn't justify wreaking class vengeance on an innocent, set of young people who had no, no, they didn't take any part in this alleged discrimination. They didn't benefit from patriarchal privilege. So why should they be punished for the alleged sins of their fathers? Like, it's the most atrocious kind of ideological attitude to have. And yet, I think, as far as I can see, it's absolutely common. And whenever I argue with a feminist online or anything, that's always what they say. They always say, well, up until recently, girls were being disadvantaged. Well, so what? That's not true. But even if it were true, it would not in any way justify discrimination today. So I just find that just astounding, that attitude.
And the thing is, even if boys did like, benefit from the patriarchy, it's like, well, women too, but that's another point. But the thing is,
Well, of course, exactly as you
yeah,
say, yes. I mean, that's the thing, that the alleged patriarchy
mm,
was a system where, yes, men had certain privileges, but they also had certain responsibilities that women did not have. Women also had certain privileges. It was just a different idea of what roles and responsibilities were appropriate for men and women. It was never a case of men hating women and oppressing them for their own selfish purposes, which is what feminism always claims. And so yes, as you said in one of your questions to me about the Titanic
mm,
and what that symbolized about male self-sacrifice for women, that is patriarchy too. If we're going to talk about what it actually meant in practice, it did mean men having their bodies crushed in soul and body wearying labor on a regular basis, and during war and during times of disaster, as in the case of the Titanic, actually willingly sacrificing their lives in order that women would be saved. And so, that's not exactly the image of patriarchal privilege that feminism tells us about.
it's very interesting. I was talking to one of my female colleagues, and I said we're talking about basically dating, and she said like it's very interesting. I said there's these romantic gestures that a man do for a woman, and historically, like giving flowers. You're the one taking the need to offer,
Yes.
propose. But the thing is, she said
Yes.
those are self-imposed uh, by the man in terms of like you put your the pressure on yourself. And I said to her like this is a thing that also women they will talk about and like you're complicit into this because if if you have a man uh you're expecting him to hold the door and when he holds the door you're happy and you tell like oh he's so charming and stuff like that so you're positively reinforcing this behavior and it's like you're also participating in this pressure it's not just self-imposed but
Yes, I love that. That I've encountered that defense as well. Oh, this is just something that men uh this is a system that men created,
yeah.
so it's their own fault. Well, that's I mean that's just nonsense. That is utter nonsense. For one thing, it is not a system that simply sprang up um, in a completely artificial way. It's rooted in nature. It's rooted in male superior strength and the innate drive to protect women because that it's necessary for survival. And so that's just something that it is there, and girls and women expect it from men. If a crazed shooter breaks into a nightclub, it's the men who throw themselves on top of their girlfriends and wives in order to protect them and even to take bullets in their own body, as happened, for example, in the Donald Trump assassination attempt at his rally. A man died because he threw himself across his wife and daughters. It doesn't happen the other way around. Women do not have an innate drive to protect their husbands in that way. There might be the odd woman who does, but it is by no means common. A few women did die in the Titanic. They made the choice to stay back with their husbands, and but most didn't. Most got into the lifeboats and kissed their husbands goodbye and hoped that it wouldn't be for the last time. And so that is simply a part of the natural order. And I think despite all the talk of equality and women being just as capable as men, when most husband and wife, boyfriend and girlfriend, if they wake up in the middle of the night and they hear a window crash and sounds like somebody's coming in to the house, I don't think there's very many women that say, "Hey, you stay back. I'll go down and check out." And no, that's not how it happens. So a lot of the so-called patriarchal myths about male chivalry and men protecting women, and as you say, the man who gets down on his knee and asks for the hand in marriage, and all the ways that men uplift and protect and provide for women. Those things are still in place.
Mhm.
And I don't see very many feminists saying that they want to have a 200-year period where only women are drafted to fight in wars. I don't hear anybody talking about that. I don't hear anybody saying that women are going to, from now on, take the worst jobs, the jobs with the highest workplace injury and fatality rates, which are something like 97% male now. I don't hear women saying that they want those jobs and they want to protect their men. I remember when COVID started, there was a lot of discussion about the fact that the pandemic, that virus happened to affect men quite a bit more severely than women. Men died in higher numbers when men were admitted to the emergency rooms in much higher numbers. I don't remember any women coming out and saying that they were going to, do all the shopping and, go outside so that they could protect their boyfriends or husbands. All I saw were a bunch of articles about how women were allegedly hardest hit by the pandemic. No matter what happens in our society, there's always discussion about how women are hardest hit. So, so this notion that we need to care more about women, that still exists. It's just as alive and well as it ever was. And yet women are perfectly able, if they wish, to access any of the professions in our society, to start businesses, to do whatever they want to do. And yet that's not enough for them.
And that's it's And that's what makes it critical and essential for your work on Substacks and everything like that, because you talk about cases that it's not in the mainstream media, and that's about the part that people they don't see. Because, but the thing is, even if they see it, they only select the part where it's the woman being the victim, and they will see a
Yeah.
domestic violence case where
Yeah.
a man will beat up his boy to death, and like the first victim is the mother, and just like, well, I think the first victim is not the one crying here, it's the one who's dead. And but the thing is, you gotta only see, even it's the front of your face. So for all the cases where it's actually the woman who beat a little girl to
Yeah.
death, you're not gonna see it.
Hmm.
So you need to have this alternative. And but the thing is, what's great, I think, it's that there's a growing number of interest in these alternatives, because the mainstream is basically only showing a portion or actually lying to you.
Yes.
And it's very interesting, because the thing
Yeah.
is, I read I was interested into reading Betty Friedan Feminine Mystique recently, and
Oh, you did. Good for you.
I mean, it's very interesting because I'm out of schools for a couple of years, and I've never been really academic side, but Jordan Peterson made me start reading Russian authors from the 19th century, and you got me into reading Betty Friedan. I don't know if I should thank you or not, but the
Yeah, exactly. Who can blame you?
but but the thing is, like there's this you talked about it, like there's this idea that there's a scale between like absolute every wave of feminism is perfect, and there's the minimum of like let's just say the first wave is was good. Actually, it helped the basic rights, and then you go against it. But the thing is, once you read the actual founders of this movement, you see like they were out of here. Like I mean, some of
Yeah.
them were really questionable characters, and their ideas were might be based in something true. Like maybe like there was more of a homemaker role to women, and maybe like the right of vote and stuff like that were net positive in the society. But after that, like it's just like how could you uh, like we talked about like the inconsistencies and the incongruence and the contradictory um, pillars of feminism where are celebrating the actually things that they pledged they fought against. It's like you can't really I don't know, because you see these graphs where the men are becoming more conservative and the women are becoming more Democrats, let's say, and it's just like
Yeah.
obviously like, and that's the question I wanted to ask you about this concept of male sacrifice. Like the feminists want the male allies. They want the men should like support these women movies. Like why don't they make as much as the box office? Like well, the whole movies you spend like about being negative to me. It's like and you're
Yeah.
just like how am I supposed to support that?
I know you're supposed to hate. The only way you can be acceptable to a modern feminist is to hate your own sex, to hate the masculinity in you, and to hate other men, or at least to believe that women have the right to hate them. You can maybe feel sorry for them and help them to become more pro-feminist themselves. That would be the best you could hope for. But yeah, I know it's diluted. It really is. I remember reading in 2017, a professor of sociology named Susanna Walters published an article called "Why Can't We Hate Men?" in the Washington Post, that beacon of unbiased journalism. And that it was a like I thought it must be a satire, and it wasn't. It was absolute, straight up. Women have every right to hate men because men are responsible for all the ills of the world. Men are violent, men are oppressive, etc. And she said to men, if you don't want us, meaning all women, to hate you for all time, this is what you have to do. You have to step back, step away from the power. Don't run for political office. Don't, take charge in any arena, vote for feminist women for into political office and allow women to take charge. And that is the naked message of modern feminism. Men should have no power whatsoever. I assume that even a crazed man hater like Suzanne Walters would say that, well, we still need men to do some of these jobs. When it's 40 below and the electrical lines are down, we're still going to have to get some guys in to do the work. When the sewer pipe bursts and the street is flooded, we're going to have to get men to do that at 2 a.m. I've driven by these crews repairing the pipes, and they're always all male. So I guess those men will still have something to do, but anything that has to do with managing, directing, leading, writing opinion pieces, all of those things that women like the idea of, those will all be feminist women in those positions. So it is quite extraordinary what they're asking. And it's extraordinary to me that a lot of men, I wouldn't say they necessarily go along with it, but they don't really object. Like men, I find men's patience and tolerance under all that hatred and bigotry quite astounding. I remember watching a group of men, who'd come to hear an anti-feminist speaker at a university, and it got interrupted. And they were just sitting there, like I was just furious that their right to hear this speaker had been taken away by a feminist mob. And that used to happen all the time whenever I would try to speak to a group of students. Some group of rabble rousers would feel it was their right to prevent me from speaking. And yeah, I'm always astounded at how patient most men are under the what seem to me intolerable provocations of a lot of nasty women, as Trump said.
And
So, yeah.
and it's very interesting. Um, like you said, like you would try to stalk, to speak, and they would pull the alarm, they would shout, and everything like that. And it's very interesting. Could it be like you're very well positioned to fight against these ideas because you're educated, you're familiar with the literature, but also it might be personal in terms of like so you're very motivated. You've seen yourself having these speakers come in, but they can't. They're blocked. Police has to break apart the students to let them in, and but
Yeah.
that's the part where like if you're interested in girls and women's health, you think like, oh, maybe feminism is a good way to support them. But actually, if you look at the feminine health, mental health, it's like just
Mental
declining. Like,
health.
I mean
Yeah.
the,
Hmm.
I mean you can talk about the pharmacology and the, like it's so high. It's so like, but yeah, it's not that much of a good
Exactly.
way because.
Yeah. If feminism has helped anybody, you'd think we would see evidence of it. Where is the evidence that feminism has? I mean, it clearly has not helped men and boys.
Mhm.
That's whatever they say. You can look at any metric and see that boys and men are doing poorly in comparison to women in terms of skills acquisition, in terms of job status, in terms of real wages, all those things. But okay, so feminists will say, well, we don't care about boys and men. That's just what happens when you're not privileged anymore, right? It's hard. It feels like oppression when you're not privileged anymore. And okay, so let's look at girls and women. They are doing better in terms of the choices that they have, in terms of their wages, in terms of the freedoms that they have, the protections that they have gained in law and et cetera. But it doesn't seem to have made them any happier. And study after study after study indicates exactly as you said that their mental health is declining. Women themselves report over and over again less life satisfaction and less happiness than previous generations of girls and women, and also than boys and men themselves report. So, and it starts in the 1980s. So it's really interesting that it actually starts when feminism really takes hold. Feminism, of course, began, second wave feminism began in the 60s, but it started to come into the schools and universities in the 70s. But I think it really took hold in the culture in the 1980s. And from that decade on, every decade we witnessed declining self-reported levels of happiness. So what's and the answer of feminists is usually, well, that's because
Mm,
men and boys have been the ones who have been advantaged by the changes in the culture, which isn't true, of course. And they'll just say, well, we need more feminism.
mm,
But this is a social experiment that has been tried now for quite a long time, like my entire lifetime. I'm 60 years old, and I grew up in a feminist culture, and I've seen wave upon wave of more aggressive feminism. And it doesn't seem to be working. And I think there are lots of perhaps reasons for that that one can speculate about. But I think growing up believing, well, first of all, being told you can do anything but not being forced to earn the things that you want to achieve. I think that is damaging in itself. I think there's a moral hazard in telling women that they're perfect, they're wonderful, that everything they do is wonderful, and in preventing legitimate criticism of women's behavior and women's natures. I think that's really, really damaging. And I think we're seeing the results of that. And I think also women aren't held to a standard of good behavior or virtuous behavior in the way that they always were in times past. I think all previous societies, certainly in the West, were um, gynocentric, prized and cared about women, but they held women to a certain standard of behavior. And I don't think we have that anymore. And it's a terrible thing for one's sense of self. We're always talking about self esteem, self worth, but those are not things that can be given to somebody. You can't tell somebody you're great and suddenly they have self esteem. They have to earn it
mhm,
by behaving well, even in difficult circumstances. And I don't think women are taught how to do that at all. And at the same time, they're told over and over again that men are the enemy and that the whole society is somehow stacked against them. And so they build up a lot of resentment. And it feels kind of good. At least, I was a feminist, as I'm sure you know, partly because, well, I was dumb, I guess. I was kind of stupid. I accepted, what I was taught at university. I read a lot of feminist theory. I read Betty Friedan. I believed what she had to say, even though she lied about everything in that book, pretending she was a housewife. She was actually a communist organizer. I mean, I find that fascinating. She was out every night. Her husband said she never did housework or cooked a meal for them. Yet she pretended she was trapped in the home, suffering
Yeah.
in a comfortable concentration camp, as she said. So I read all those lies, and I found it exciting. There is a kind of exhilarating rush of self-righteous fury that comes upon you when you think, I'm a member of an oppressed class, and I'm going to smash the patriarchy. But after a while, I just realized that was an empty kind of self-righteous rage, because there was no oppression, and I had to admit I'd never been oppressed. I'd always been encouraged. My parents, every person I met had encouraged me to be my best self, and and ultimately I think that sense of resentment that can develop when you focus intensively on all the wrongs that are being done to you rather than all the opportunities that you're being given and all the kindnesses that people do to you. It just brings out the worst in you, and it makes you miserable.
So,
So yeah, I think the best thing that could happen for a lot of women would be for the whole obsession with victimization to just be somehow made to disappear.
absolutely, and it's interesting because you mentioned like if men and boys are not doing well, it's like, well, it's because when you don't have privilege, normalcy feels like oppression.
Yeah,
But the thing is,
exactly.
it's such a shift in responsibility because you're gonna see like 95% homeless people,
Yes.
95% suicide. Like I think from 18 to 40, the the most prevalent form of death is suicide. Uh, might be in Europe, some country, but the thing is, they'll say like, "Oh, the reason why it's because of the patriarchy. We need more
Yeah.
feminism." Like you said, like it's not enough. It's like the reason why it's not that's good because we need more of it, and the
Yeah.
movement has no failure. It has no flaws. It's very interesting, but this fight
Yes.
against
Exactly.
these shadowy concept of sexism and racism. It's like it's probably not your enemy. It's like there's technocrats and oligarchs who want you like to be in 15-minute cities and like to eat bugs to save the
Exactly.
environment. These people really don't
Exactly.
like you, and like like
Yes.
that's probably your enemy, not like some like the man like keeping you down and oppressing you. Like if you do good, I
Exactly.
mean, you might
Yeah.
uh, escalate the social structure. But if you're, like indoctrinated with an ideology, like, and the fact is, you're indoctrinated in colleges. So basically, these places that were once places where you could discuss and like debate and like have this discussion, they're basically actually the exact opposite, where there's only one idea and you have to believe it, and it's right,
Yes.
and you can't challenge it. It has to
Yes.
be so insane because you're thinking like as a 17-year-old, like I'm gonna go to college, gonna meet interesting people, and I'm gonna probably gonna change. I'm gonna read some philosophers, and you get there and it's like, oh no, this philosopher, Freud was actually sexist, and no, you can't read this or that. It's like, well, like, I thought I was here to learn, but actually that's not that's not what it's
I
about.
know. It's so sad. Yeah, I agree with you. It's like it's almost it is like the world has been turned upside down. And yeah, the realities that you mentioned about, men are 95% of the prison population. If you go and talk to those guys in prison, almost all of them are fatherless.
Mm.
So there's like these horrible things that are, and you're not allowed, even like to have Father's Day now. There's always feminists talking about how it's wrong to suggest that children need fathers. Like that's now become a misogynistic thing to say. Like it's just so there's so much denial. And then, as you say, yeah, you go to university thinking you're going to be able to explore all these ideas. You're going to have debates, and you're really going to have ideas tested, and you're going to read all these challenging books and have your mind opened. And it's just become like more and more a place where you are to be indoctrinated into these really destructive, essentially, anti-social, they're, anti-Western, anti-social ideas, so that you believe it would be better to tear down everything that exists and rebuild it in some sort of utopian mold. And you believe, as you said, that there's the man, whether he's the actual man, the patriarch that you hate, or he's some other figure. Um, that that's what you should hate and put all your energies into rebelling against. And as you say, like, yeah, we do probably have enemies, and well, we clearly do. The people that want to determine what we're going to have to do and whether we're going to be allowed to eat meat or we'll have to eat bugs or whatever, like those, yeah, we need those are serious things to look at and to resist. And instead we're tearing each other apart. And if you had set up a plan, a really deliberate plan to make this society ripe to be utterly controlled and destroyed in that way, well, one of the things you'd want to do for sure is to break apart families, break the bond between men and women, break the bond between fathers and their children, alienate men because men are the protectors of the society. Men are the ones that can organize together to defeat an enemy and to resist a foe and to protect the weaker ones in the society. Women are not going to be able to do that no matter what. And so, yeah, of course, you'd want to let women take charge of everything and make women hate men. So it's perfect.
Yes.
It I don't know. It seems like you try to say that to people, And I agree with you that there are some signs of change, some things that are hopeful. As you say, there's sort of a growing resistance and discussion on the internet about some of these things. But like in mainstream culture, and if you speak to somebody who's only within that culture and only reads like the mainstream news outlets and that, like they just think you're utterly crazy. And I think they're crazy. And it's very difficult even to speak across the divide. And it is especially concerning that all the universities, it seems, are marching in lockstep to inculcate these ideologies.
And it's interesting. There's people that I respect, and they're very smart, and they they they're critical of the critics of the establishment, let's say, because they say you're trying to establish an idea that things are going they're worse, basically, like the economy and everything like that. But actually, if you see these markers, education or let's say the length of life, it's actually going up. So things are actually better, and you're just seeing monsters where there's not. And they're smart
Mm,
people actually,
mm,
and scientifically they're correct on some points. But I don't think like you can attribute. I'm not sure like you can look away from like the mental health crisis or like um, really like
yes.
there's a
Mhm.
centralization, I think, and ownership and power, like where these companies they don't they're not really competing. It's like the Facebooks and the Googles, they really own everything. Like they're monopolies, and the BlackRocks and
Yes.
without being a conspiracy theorist, like really these are billions and trillion-dollar companies, and they're like everywhere. Like
Mhm.
it's very
Yes.
absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, it's really easy to talk to you. Yeah.
Oh, I really enjoy it. Yeah, and I agree with you that yes, I agree that like our side,
Yeah,
like to
absolutely.
say speak very generally, we maybe can be accused of sometimes over stressing some of the negatives, but um I don't know. It may well be true that lifespan is increasing generally. I think it's dropped since COVID, and I don't think it's from COVID. But so that's and that whole issue. What happened during COVID, even putting aside the vaccines and whether they killed a lot of people. I am not equipped to really evaluate that evidence. I'm just not smart enough. I haven't read enough. I believe they did. I think they killed a lot of people. I don't know whether that was intentional or not. Um, but just looking at the things that happened during COVID, I don't see how anybody with a clear mind could say that that wasn't terrifying and bizarre. Lockdowns, like everybody knew it wouldn't work. 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Are you
Yeah.
kidding me?
My
Like,
favorite
did
part.
anyone? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
My favorite part is that overnight it was like no mandate, no nothing, no passport. Like literally in Quebec, you had this passport on your phone, like call it a
Yeah.
passport, but it's like your vaccination proof.
Yes.
And then overnight, it's like, oh no, you can shop here, and you don't have to have the vaccine for your work or traveling. It's like, it's this deadly thing, and then 2 weeks
Yeah.
later, it's like, oh no, it's just be,
It's
wear a
okay.
mask. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just wear your mask. And if you're sick, you don't even have to really stay home anymore. But, just don't get too close to people. I mean, it was
Mm.
so, I don't know, like that was to me, I
It's
could not have imagined that. And I could not have imagined how quickly the vast majority of people fell in line, even when the instructions were changing all the time. First, no, it wasn't necessary to wear a mask. Here in BC, we had a health minister who, not health minister, chief health officer, who said no, masks don't help, masks don't do anything, no, we don't wear a mask. Then all of a sudden, yes, you have to wear a mask is very, very important to prevent transmission. And then, oh well, actually one mask wasn't good enough, you had to wear a number, two masks, you had to have at least 4 layers, and it changed all the time. And then we had the distancing rules, and you had arrows in all of the stores that you had to follow, and everybody was following. And it was just, yeah, I don't know. I found it
Yeah.
terrifying, and so many of the rules were obviously just
Subjective.
useless. This notion that you would lock people down, even though some people would still have to be around just to keep the city functioning. So clearly the virus could not be stopped. And viruses cannot be stopped. They just can't. And so this notion that you would lock down businesses and force people to lose their businesses, I just found it terrifying. So that to me revealed that yes, there is an enemy. There's an enemy who wants to control us, and the last thing we need are to be divided by these completely irrational ideologies, of which I think, intersectional feminism is just absolutely the worst. And yeah, anybody who can deny that men dropping out of college, men dropping out of society altogether. I know so many men who feel that like there's just no point really in, like, they feel like they are literally disliked and unwanted as members of their society.
Yeah.
And I whatever feminism claims about the past and how women were not allowed to do certain things in the far distant past, although from the 19th century on, women could basically enter any profession they wanted to, certainly by the late 19th century. So, we're talking well over 100 years. Women have not been restricted in any way at all. But whatever they say about the past, women were never made to feel that they were unwanted, that they were useless, that they played no important role in their society. And that's what feminism tells men today.
Mhm.
Look at the message of the Barbie movie.
Yeah.
The Kens are utterly irrelevant to the running of that society. That is feminism. Women can do everything, and women are better at everything than men. I just, yeah, that is a really hideous message to give to anybody. And if it were anybody but men in general that message were being directed at, everybody would say this is obscene. But somehow there's such a reflex indifference toward men's well-being that it's allowed to go forward. So
Yeah, I'm not sure. You talked about this. There might be a scientific study who showed that uh, like the tears of women, they create a reaction in men, and we're actually able to get in the mode of protecting, even if like we don't even know like what's in the valve. But yeah, it's interesting
I
because
know. It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah,
yeah,
I
exactly.
that was in my video for the International Conference on Men's Issues that was online this past summer. And yeah, I know. I just thought that was amazing. That if you sniff a vial, if you're a man and you sniff a vial of women's tears, you don't even know that that's what it is. And they had a control group that was sniffing just some sort of saline solution, that it actually has an effect on the male brain, and it shuts down the aggression, the part of the brain that produces an aggressive response, and it activates the part of the brain that is in charge of emotion. It also, I think, if I'm remembering correctly now, I think it made decision make less. It affected decision making in some way. I can't remember exactly
Mm.
how it was described, but like I just thought that was
Dig into
amazing. I mean, we all know that a man looking at a woman who is crying is likely to be deeply impacted, but like the scent itself, that there's a chemical, impact. Yeah, I just that is amazing, and that says it all, I think, about the patriarchy. Yes, perhaps the patriarchy was about men being in positions of power to control their society, to direct it, but it always involved, male openness to being concerned about women and about what's best for them.
Yeah, it's interesting because it reminds me of this bond between a mother and a child that people will never deny. They'll say mother instinct, but there's actually a bond between men and women, and like the way
Yes.
the mother protects the child and look after it, like the men actually do that, like not in just a societal, it's like actually biological, like you can prove in this study, like the tears. But it's interesting, like, you can tell people, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying, like, like the government might be tyrannical in certain instances, and like they're not really in your best interest. Like you can see, like, Project MK Ultra, stuff like that, and people are like, oh, you're
Mm.
crazy and stuff like that. But even in stuff like, that you have proof and it's in your face, people will not believe you. Like the slogan "Future is female." It's like, clearly, what does that mean to you? Like,
Yeah.
it's like we're gonna shift, like, basically all the power to this group of women that, are in line with our ideology. Because if you're a woman like you and like you don't agree, well, you like the future's female, but like not you, like basically.
Yeah, not for Janice Fiamengo, that's for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
But
I
yeah.
know. And like, wow, like talk about supremacism, and they don't even try to hide it.
Oh yeah.
It's on t-shirts and, mugs and everything. And I don't know, like I find that flabbergasting. I really do. For one thing, I don't want to be in a future that's female. It would be a disaster. We don't have any idea what a matriarchy would even look like,
Oh.
but we can certainly suspect from the way we see women interact, especially from women's general tendency, not all women, of course, but a general tendency amongst women to have trouble being accountable, taking responsibility when they do something wrong or, misbehave. That is not a sign of somebody who's going to be a good leader, somebody who can't be responsible. So, yeah, I don't want a future that's female. And, but aside from that, yeah, that is a supremacist slogan. It's disgusting. And if you look back through the history of what feminists have actually said about their beliefs and goals, totally disempowering men and even reducing the number of men who exist on the earth is a stated goal of feminism. I have never encountered a male supremacist, and I'm sure there are some male supremacists around. They don't teach at universities and they don't have large platforms, but they would never say that we should reduce the number of women. And there are lots of feminist professors, academics, philosophers. One of them was named Sally Miller Gearhart. She's still revered. She was a professor in the 1970s and 80s, and she actually wrote an essay saying that we would need to reduce the population of men to 10% of the human race. She was very pleased with herself that she said, oh, we wouldn't do it by killing men, but we would do it through reproductive technologies so that only, mainly girl children would be born, girl babies, I should say. And, there are other, Mary Daly, who was a professor at a Jesuit college for decades and decades. She agreed that, yes, that would be very important. That would be part of what she called the necessary decontamination of the earth. There's a horrible woman today going around. She's written a book called The Seven Deadly Sins for Women or something like that. Her name is Mona El Tahawi. I think she lives in Montreal, actually. She, fantasized about female vigilantes who would kill a certain number of men every week until the patriarchy finally, came to its knees and promised to stop its war on women. Like, this obsession that many feminists have with actually killing men or at least reducing their number is it's dominant in feminist theory, and that's what feminist theory is about. And that's a scary thing. I don't want those women or any women that think that way or even have sympathies with that. I don't want them in charge of my society.
So Lee, I think you mentioned being surprised with the male patients, but the thing is, I think it's actually desensitized because as I hear you talk about genocidal, revered authors, I'm like, yeah, I heard those. Like, I heard that, and but in the beginning, I don't know if you're shocked, but yeah, you're complicit, where you're like you said, like like you're not gonna go against it, but also you're like, oh, okay, fine. Like if I don't say anything, I won't lose my job, and like, okay, it's
Well,
fine. We
yeah,
should kill, you know, man. But the thing is,
yeah,
yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, it's this the idea of like if we had only women politicians, there would be no war. It's like
yeah,
you can see data on heterosexual marriages, homosexual marriages, male and female, and you can see like the domestic violence. I think it's one of the highest. It's higher than just male and female and men and men, and like their
yeah.
divorce rate is like 70+%, like
Hmm.
75. And it's like no, we like, and like you said, like you can to a certain extent predict like what it would be like to live in a matriarchy because there's um there's biological differences between men and women, and like it's might be controversial to say, but it's like to a certain extent you can predict the political leaning of someone because of their genes, and like you can see like not only like men and women are different, but they're also becoming more different. They're being
Yes.
polarized. So yeah, if you extend in the future 100 years and you have only female presidents, like, well, you're still gonna have war, because we have like Kamala Harris now and like all these people where like they have stakes in companies like these not firearm producers, but like arms manufacturers, and like they talk dollars, like they don't like men or female, like they're still gonna do that. And yeah, it's very interesting. Like saying like only women have emotional intelligence, and like male are these brutish, like dumb creatures. It's interesting because like there's a lot
Yeah.
of smart men. Like it's undeniable, and it's just like I guess they could deny it by saying like the patriarchy favors some men, and it's interesting to say because if you see like you have a friend who's lies all the time, but like like he embellish stories, you're like, what are you going to say next? Like, like I wonder what are you going to say? Like, okay, what's your next problem? It's like, well, manspreading is our new priority. It's like, oh, okay, and what's next? like,
Yeah, yeah. I know. I mean, it's just, yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, that thing about women won't go to war, like they've done studies of
Queens.
uh yeah, queens. And when queens were in charge, there were more wars overall than when you had male leaders, kings. So the whole thing is yeah. I mean, anybody who has ever lived with a group of women or tried to be part of a women's co-op or anything knows that yeah, women emotional intelligence. I would say no. I mean, emotional intelligence has to do with self-control.
Yeah.
If you can't discipline your emotions, you do not have emotional intelligence, and women can't.
Hmm.
And partially because again, they're not asked to. When I was growing up, no one ever told me not to be violent. Whereas that's something that boys learn from a very young age.
Never
You
hit a
have to
girl.
control your anger. You can't just take it out on people. Whereas girls don't learn that. And women are violent. Every serious study of domestic violence, as you said, it shows that yes, women often start fights, physical fights. Yeah, that's the largest percentage of domestic violence is one way, the woman hitting the man.
Uh,
And the biggest predictor of whether a woman will be hit in a domestic dispute is whether she hits first. Now, if you were a feminist and you really cared about saving women from domestic violence, you would broadcast that message far and wide, and you would tell women, don't ever hit your spouse. Don't wail on him because you might make him snap. He's going to try not to hit you back, but maybe he will one time. And he's stronger than you in most cases. They never say it. They deny that that's even the case. They always claim that women only hit in self-defense. That the lie, everything that feminism claims practically is an actual inversion of the truth. And we know that men are a third of the domestic violence victims. We know that men are a third of intimate partner homicides every year. And yet they're never even talked about. It's as if they don't exist. If you bring it up to a feminist, she'll say, oh, all those men were killed because the women were acting in self-defense. They were battered women.
Mm.
They had to kill the husband because they saw no other way of escaping. Like they always have an out. And I think just listening to that, to the rationales that are offered, that is my clearest evidence that I don't want those women in charge of anything. Because again, like they will not admit that women are capable of doing bad things. That very basic thing. You know, they always say that feminism is the radical idea that women are human, as if anybody denies that women are human. You know, like it's incredible. And I say that anti-feminism is the radical idea that women are adults,
Yeah.
and that as adults they have to be responsible for their human foibles and their human evil, that they also are just as capable of doing evil, and in fact in some ways more capable, because they don't take responsibility for the evil that they do.
Mm.
So yeah, it's I don't know. Yeah, it's a crazy world when you hear all of this nonsense about women's moral superiority. In, you know, every time you, as you said, you open a newspaper and yay, 70% of women are doctors. Well, let's talk seriously about what that means.
Yeah, exactly. And because like you said, like it might look different. Like, male antisocial behavior might actually be physical
Yes.
violence, and
Hmm.
but like female antisocial behavior might be a character destruction. And like
Yes.
one of it, it's like it's so considered like uh, just benign in a sense. Like it's like okay, whatever, like rumors. But like a punch that's absolutely unacceptable in society. It's like, well, I mean, like they're both unacceptable behaviors, but one is like it's not even recognized. Like
Yeah, it's
let
it's
alone.
secret for one. It's
Yeah, also.
done usually in secret, and it isn't talked about.
Mhm.
Yeah, so you're right. Yeah, I mean, and that is the interesting difference. I think that like we've never had a problem in society in the past or in the present at recognizing the shadow side of masculinity. Like you said, we all know what it is. It's physical violence, and there are all sorts of controls. A good society, a successful society, knows how to put controls on that and knows how to exploit it. You know, and it exploits men's aggression, it exploits men's competitiveness into good channels, and it punishes men who don't control it. But we have there's nothing, like there seem to be no mechanisms to control women's shadow side, or even, as you said, to recognize it.
Yeah.
And it actually isn't even true that women aren't physically violent, because they are. They just don't happen to be physically violent against men as often or as, successfully as men are violent against women, because women, of course, are not as strong as men. So women who evolve to be self-protective don't tend as often to just attack a man in the street, for example. But they do certainly, uh, they are violent
Mhm.
against members of their family. Elder abuse is participated in equally by women, and the abuse of children. All the statistics show that the killing of children under 1 year old is almost entirely practiced by women. I did a study on this not too long ago, and I worked out that a woman kills a child about once every I think it was between one, like it was about 1.5 days. Every 1.5 days, a woman kills a child under 1 year old in the United States. I mean, that's a statistic that I don't think anybody ever hears about. And it's pretty appalling. I mean, violence by men against women, obviously, that's not good. Nobody would support that, but it's at least sort of like you can understand sometimes how it happens. You're having a huge argument, your woman is just completely driving you crazy. She's screaming at you. She's been screaming at you for 2 hours, and you finally give her a really hard shove or a slap across the face or even punch her. I mean, it's wrong. But it's two agents who are involved in a quarrel, and then that happens. Whereas killing a baby or even just battering a baby and not killing it, like how do you justify that in any universe? And yet we don't even talk about that. And this has been the case always. Like women have always been violent against helpless children. I was reading something about the 19th century in England, where it was estimated by one historian that 61% of homicides in England in the mid 19th century were of babies, and almost all of those were committed by their mothers. It was a very common thing. Infanticide was widely practiced, and again, it wasn't punished because usually the woman would have a sad story about why she killed her child, or she didn't really mean to, etc. And all male juries tended to be quite lenient when a woman was brought before them charged with infanticide. And now we have special laws for infanticide that recognize postpartum depression as a contributing factor, and therefore women aren't held responsible for that particular form of violence. But it's in many ways the most heinous form of violence one can imagine. Yeah, we don't even talk about it. So, yeah, I don't know. There's just so many ways in which we treat women as children, while at the same time, never holding them responsible for bad things, while at the same time claiming that they're actually better than men and will do a better job of leading us into some sort of perfect society.
Absolutely, and it's actually like I know I'm desensitized, but I also not. Like there's always a new high, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's I'm gonna have to take a minute for that because Loretta Bobbitt was someone I think like you talked about, like
Mm.
she she basically dismembered the genitals of her ex-husband, and like now like there's this praise and like this reverence to her, and like she's a survivor, and like it's exactly like you said, like a woman might leave her baby in the crib and go party for a week, let him die, come back and like say like, oh, okay, I'm kind of sorry, but also be sorry for me because I'm also the victim and stuff like that. It's like no, like how could we accept that? But the thing is, Warren Farrell talked about it, he said like the homicide rate might look higher for the men, but the thing is, the way women kill often implies uh, they often hire like hitmen, so it looks like an accident,
Yes.
and so those are professional
Hmm.
killing, and like when you see it, like it's actually probably equal. And the thing is, when you look at different stages of age, actually like kids, 4-year-old guys and girls, they like I think they have the same level of aggression and all the way. And yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I heard this. There's basically a male behavior minister in Australia. Like,
Oh, yes. Yes.
I,
Hmm. Yeah.
this one,
Yeah.
I
I
can't.
know. I know, it's unbelievable. Yeah, minister for male behavior. Yeah, I know. It's incredible. The obsessive focus on demonizing men and pretending that they're the only problem in society, and that nothing women do need concern us at all. And yeah, I think your point about women's modes of violence is a really interesting one too, because I was thinking about that. Yeah, there was a famous case in Canada not too long ago, well, 10 years ago or more. Nicole Ryan, I think her name was. She tried to hire a hitman twice to kill her husband, and this was her ex-husband. Like, so this was not like, it wasn't like, oh, she was in a horrible marriage and she couldn't think how to get out. No, she wanted to kill her ex-husband, and so she hired one guy, and I think he just didn't go through with it. She paid him a certain amount of money. Then she hired a second guy who was an undercover police officer who got the whole thing recorded. And so she was then tried, and she claimed, of course, that she had been battered by this man, and she was so scared of him, and that's why she did this. Although she'd never said that when she was talking to the man she thought was a hitman, the undercover police officer. So, but that was taken quite seriously. And I think, I can't remember all the details now, but I think she either was a hung jury or she might even have been acquitted. She was not convicted, as far as I know. And then they decided not to go ahead with the case. The police decided, or the Crown prosecutor decided not to take it to a second trial because she'd already suffered enough, they said. So even a woman who, in cold blood, had tried to kill a completely innocent man who had never been convicted or even arrested on any charges of domestic violence, and he actually came forward and said, it's a complete lie. I was never violent. There's this idea that she was a victim. So yeah, that notion is so prevalent. It excuses nearly anything. And I was thinking too about what you said about like male violence. And I think often women will get a man to do their violence for
Yeah, for
them.
them.
And you come across many cases of a brother whose sister tells him that some guy harassed her, and then he'll go and beat him up. Or a girlfriend who sets a male friend on another guy because she claims he raped her or he did something. And yeah, that's how women operate, and it's certainly very destructive of social cohesion, and it deserves to be talked about just as much as any other form of violence.
Absolutely. I mean, they get
Yeah,
basically
but
half the time in prison for, for the same crime.
yes, exactly. Yeah. Sonia Starr's research published in 2014, I think, she said that the sentences that women got for similar crimes, and she did all sorts of work to make sure they were actually comparable. She said that women's sentences were 63% less severe than men's for the same types of crimes. And she said, and that doesn't even take into account all the other ways that pro woman prejudice operates. For instance, women are far less likely, I think they're twice as likely not to be charged at all. And they're twice as likely, if they are charged, to be acquitted. And then they're twice as likely, if they are found guilty, to be given a suspended sentence of some type, or something where they don't have to actually spend any time in jail. So like at every single stage of their encounter with law enforcement, women are treated much more leniently. And yet still, if you put into Google, if you put in a phrase like movement to keep women out of prison, you'll find all sorts of feminists and their friends saying that we shouldn't have any women in prison because women are victims. And any woman who commits a crime, it's either because she was raised in circumstances of deprivation, or she struggled with addictions, or she was led into crime by somebody else. It wasn't really, but that's true of men as well. The men, men struggle with addictions. Most men in prison were brought up in violent families. They were neglected. They were deprived. So like again, the double standards every single time are so striking. And this is supposed to be in a society that doesn't care about women.
It's fascinating, and that's one of the reason why I think it's so respectable for people like you and like an author that I like, Nina Power. Women that will talk about the men's issue. It's like you could actually be on the other side where like you could say the right thing and like they will give you like the shine and stuff like that, but you actually go against like this very powerful movement, this hegemony, and like you're risking like everything just to like do what you think it's right. And I mean at the end, like when I discovered you, I was like, there's no way like there's no way like this person. But like I was like, oh wow, okay, that's very interesting. Like just the idea of being anti-feminist, I was like, I don't even know what that is. Like it was not that crazy when I was a kid, but like it's still like they even got me into feminism in some point. And like, but like when you say
Mm.
like, oh, like there's a lie here, there's a lie there, and you start like with the internet to discover people, or like, oh wow, okay, there's people who are against this, but then like you see women who are vocal about it. It's very impressive.
Yeah, well, I wasn't the first. Like, I didn't, just make it up out of my own head, really. Like, I did discover other, certainly men, like you mentioned, Warren Farrell. I think he's the grandfather of men's issues advocacy, and all of his books are just so, like, so packed with information, and they blow your mind. He's wonderful. I encountered Paul Elam, who is also a really powerful commentator, and then there are lots of women, especially in Canada, for some reason. Like there's the Honey Badgers,
Mhm.
Allison Tiemann, and Brian Martinez, and Hannah. Wallen and of course Karen Strawn is
Mhm. Yeah.
unparalleled in her anti-feminist men's advocacy. And there used to be a wonderful woman named Janet Bloomfield who did all sorts of fantastic videos. She isn't on the scene anymore. There's Bettina Arndt in Australia. Helen Smith, who wrote Men on Strike in the United States. She's really wonderful. There are some, you know, feminists who are critical of feminism, like Christina Hoff Sommers. She's interesting. I don't agree with her on everything. She's still kind of a feminist, but she has a lot of really good stuff too. Camille Paglia is wonderful in many ways. And so, yeah, so there were lots of, interesting people for me to look at, who sort of strength. Like I started with a hunch. You know how it starts. Sometimes you're like, this doesn't feel right. This can't be true. That's when I started teaching.
Yeah.
And every book that you teach in English literature, you're supposed to teach it from a feminist perspective, or at
Uh,
least generally from a sort of social justice perspective. And I mean, partly it was like, well, okay, I'm reading Jane Austen. She wrote these novels in the 1790s mostly, and early in the first decade of the 19th century. And yet there were powerful women in those novels, and women were respected. They had roles to play. Maybe they didn't have as many opportunities as women have today, but it was hardly like a horribly, horribly oppressive society. She was herself a young woman who decided to become a novelist, and nobody stopped her. Her family encouraged her. They loved that she had that talent, and they encouraged her to use it. So, and but then I just, all the emphasis was on encouraging women, telling men that they should be ashamed because they're male. And yeah, so that was when I just, I did, the whole house of cards that had been my feminist ideology, it started, just disintegrating everywhere. And yeah, so but then I explored, and thank God for the internet. I mean, I'm so afraid that it'll be shut down, because it is so important to find communities of people who think in the way that you've started to think, and who can give you all sorts of tools and information. It's not misinformation or disinformation, it's the truth.
yeah.
And yeah, so
They
I
no, absolutely, and they just banned Twitter in Brazil, and
yeah.
protesting, and it's yeah, it that's the thing. It's so interesting because I was talking to a friend. It's like the internet is like it's very good for the people who want to learn the truth and like fight for freedom, but it's also a good way to like uh, disseminate a certain particular idea to people. It's like the first result on Google to me probably shouldn't be trusted. Like that's the
Oh,
you
for
know
sure. I know. Yeah,
it's like is
I
Trump
know, that's
guilty? It's like oh
shocking.
yes,
Yeah,
Washington Post
yeah.
absolutely guilty. It's like you gotta start the eighth maybe, but
Uh-huh. Yeah, I know, it's really like, for my research, it's not bad, because I'll just put in something like woman accuses man of sexual assault. All these things come up, and so I can find all these feminist articles, and but if I'm trying to find the actual truth,
yeah,
it will be hidden and often really difficult to find. And so many things have been erased. And yeah, I have friends who are better researchers than I, and they know how to use the Wayback Machine, and all these different things, and find stuff that's been scrubbed from the internet. Because I remember, it's so frustrating. I'll remember an article I read, or a video or something, and then I just can't find it. And I know I have the title, and I know I have the author, and it's just not there anymore. And
yeah.
it's, yeah, really annoying.
That's why it's important for people to like take screenshot and like
Yeah,
save and download the things because you never know when like
yeah,
that channel might be delete it or anything like that. Uh,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's interesting. I've seen Jane Austen books. It's kind of like, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not sure, but is it kind of like Steinbeck? I want to talk literature. I really like. I have an expert here, so but maybe we can finish the feminist part of it. Right now, you're writing a book on the F word. uh, f-
Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm. Yes, I am. Well, yeah, I hope I'll finish it. It's hard because it's hard to know, it's hard to make the selection. There's so many, like essentially what I want to write is a history of feminist thought so that somebody who has that idea that first wave feminism was good and maybe even second wave feminism was okay, but then it all went wrong, at some point in the 1980s or 1990s or the early 21st century. And so I want to show everything that is wrong with feminism today was there right at the beginning. Absolutely. Those were man haters. They were irrational. They lied. Many of them were well educated women who'd been brought up by loving fathers who gave them all sorts of opportunities. And then they lied about it and claimed that they were oppressed and that all men were driven by an insatiable desire to oppress women and harm them. And so I want to show in their own words how extreme they were and how unfair to the male sex. So I think that's a worthy goal, but it's hard because it's hard to make the selection of which earlier writers and advocates to profile. And I need to be really careful that everything is 100% accurate. And sometimes it's hard to find the information about these early people's lives because I want to include a bit of biographical information as well. So it's a big project, and I must admit, I get sidetracked by some contemporary issue that I want to write about for my Substack. So, but yeah, that's the plan is to write that book.
Nice. Um, and what's the process like for you? Like writing, is it every day, like 2 hours? How does this
That's
work?
the ideal. That is definitely the ideal. For me, the ideal is I get up in the morning before I open my email, before I really do anything else other than maybe make myself a cup of tea. I sit down and I write for at least an hour. An hour is not very much, but it's something. And over a week, you build up a body of writing. 2 hours is sort of the ideal. I think you can really get into your train of thought. And so yeah, that's the way I do it. I don't find that it gets any easier. In fact, in a way, I think it gets harder. I'm more of a perfectionist now than ever before. I agonize over every single word. I rewrite every sentence many, many times. And I have this ideal in my mind, of how I want it to be just so accurate, but also like memorable and stylistically effective. And I'm so often not satisfied with what I produce. So I rewrite and rewrite, rewrite, and I agonize. My toes curl. I'm in agony. I'm in a bad mood if it's not going well. But when it does go well, it's very satisfying.
I heard this technique to actually like circumvent that, which is like write fast and write wrong, which is like just get it on the paper and then you can like edit. Is that a good way or does that work?
Yes. Yes, that does work. Yeah. Uh-huh. And I remember that was the advice that a professor of mine gave to our class. It was a writing class in first year university. And he said, yeah, you have to, first of all, you turn off the critical faculty in your brain because you can get so blocked if you start writing and then immediately you start judging what you're writing. So instead of doing that, just focus on getting it down. Even if you know that some of what you're writing is just nonsense, really badly done and you're going to have to scrap it, but just keep on going and you get into a groove. You get something down. Even if you end up eliminating 80% of it, there'll be some nuggets that are good and that lead into the arguments you want to make, and that's the way to do it. And then you bring the critical faculty to assess it, edit it, revise later on once you've got something to work with. And that, I think, that's the best strategy.
And that's perfect. Yeah, I mean, we talked about like you said, it doesn't really get easier. It's still a challenge
It
every time.
doesn't. It's hard. Yeah, it's really, I find it really, really hard. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. But like anything that's good to do is difficult. It's
Yeah.
painful. I find it like psychologically painful. And that's why, you have to choose all sorts of tricks to play on yourself to get yourself to do it. Even like when I was writing my PhD dissertation, I had the same thing. You get into it, you've written maybe your first chapter, now you're halfway through the second chapter, you get bogged down, you're not really sure where you're going with it. You just there's all sorts of reasons not to do it that day because you just don't
Hmm.
feel like it. Just like, if you're an athlete training for whatever your thing is that you're doing, you might probably many days you don't really feel like doing the training because it's physically demanding and painful. And I think it's very similar. Intellectual work is often quite painful in that way. And so I had to trick myself. Like I actually I wrote at least one chapter of my PhD dissertation on a tiny little notebook because I got this thing where every time I sat at my computer, I'd see the blank screen and I would just, I don't want to do it. I'm not ready. I don't have any thoughts yet. And so but I thought if I write by hand in a little notebook, that's not nearly as, daunting. And so I did that. And it worked. I wrote a whole chapter in a little notebook and then I would transcribe it at the end of the day and the words mounted up but it was just somehow it was a way of persuading myself that I was going to start writing and what I was writing was just notes towards the chapter. Rather, it didn't have to be perfect. And yeah, that worked. And I still do that. Some days I can sit at the keyboard and work on the keyboard. Other days I just can't. And I work in notebooks or on scraps of paper. Yeah, just yeah, you have to sort of do what you're able to do on that particular day. And I never work at night. I like unless I absolutely have to, but at night I'm way more tired and sort of down on myself and in a negative frame of mind. Whereas in the morning I feel way sharper and yeah, and just better about the world in general. And so I think that's the other thing. You have to know when you're the time that you can do the work you want to do. You have to figure out when that is and what the ideal conditions are for your work and create those for yourself.
Yeah, there's so many tricks you have to. It's so funny. It's like, okay, I'll just do 15 minutes, or I'll give
Exactly.
myself a treat afterwards. Like,
Exactly. Yeah, I think yeah, that's really important. I remember my husband who wanted well, he learned the guitar quite late in life and he talked to this one guy who was a really great guitarist at a guitar shop and he said, you sit down like even when you just don't feel like it and you don't want to practice, just do 5 minutes and just force yourself to do the 5 minutes and then the 5 minutes can sometimes get a bit longer and then you've done something at least. And it's like it's a constant process of talking yourself into doing the thing that you want to do but you don't feel like doing.
absolutely. And like, if you're into science and optimization, like, I listened to Dr. Huberman, and
Mm?
there's really
Uh-huh.
like optimized way to actually learn, like, and you can learn how to learn, and I imagine like because he talks about like supplements, caffeine or nicotine, or like the optimal amount, the ratio of
Mm.
practice and resting, and the way you should actually practice, like say in sport, you should actually like the the muscle memory, we'll call it. Uh, it should only be primed to do the things the right way. So thinking like in baby steps, it's good for like the amount of time. But in terms of quality, it should actually be quality repetition from the get-go. Should I? So you only learn the good way to do something, and
Mm.
yeah, it's
Mhm.
very interesting.
Yes. One of my jobs, one of my many jobs when I was like 15, I think I worked as a receptionist at a fitness center. and they had these machines that were called Nautilus machines. Have you ever heard of those? I don't know if anybody uses them
Yeah.
anymore, but I learned the philosophy of weight training on those kinds of machines, and it was really interesting. And it was that idea that you only do you exercise a specific muscle group to muscle failure, and you only need to do that one set of repetitions up until failure, and it's if it's done right, that's all you need to do. You don't need to over exercise the muscle group. And I mean, I'm not an athlete
Yeah.
of any sort. I'm although I like walking but and running, but I remember being fascinated that there is a whole, not only, well, there's a philosophy, but a physiology of exercise science and everything. I know that's a whole
Yeah.
interesting area of learning.
Absolutely. And I was about to ask, like, the definition of anti-feminism in the sense of like the definition of feminism, people will say it's equality between men and women. So when you say like you're an anti-feminist, they might be scared or whatever. Like what would be the definition basically?
Oh, yeah, I don't think there probably is, any one definition, because I think there are a lot of different anti-feminisms. But I would say mainly it is an objection to the idea on which feminism is based, that we live and have lived in a patriarchy in which women have been oppressed by men, and in which women are the victims of male lust and the drive to dominate and control. That is certainly the feminist claim about the past and even about the present. And so anti-feminism is mainly a rejection of that,
Hmm.
and a rejection of the false tenets of feminism that always position women as innocent victims of male villainy. Yeah,
Absolutely.
so I think, many anti-feminists do have different ideals and different goals. Most anti-feminists will say that they're truly interested in equality, and that therefore they're focusing on the many men's issues in which men are not treated well by our society, and in which women are advocating for something that isn't anywhere near equality. But others actually come right out and say that they don't believe in equality. And I think, the more I have studied and thought and experienced life, what does equality mean? Are we talking about an equal valuing of both sexes? In that case, of course, I agree. Yes, I want women to be valued in society just as I think men should be valued. But do we believe that men and women are equally capable of doing everything that a society requires to flourish? And no, I don't think so. I think clearly women are better at certain things, and men are better at certain things. And in general, men have different characteristics than women have, as you yourself pointed out. And those characteristics make men better suited for various types of roles and leadership positions: men's aggression, men's competitiveness, men's mental and physical strength, men's greater physical courage, men's greater interest in truth seeking rather than consensus. Like, there's just so many different ways in which men are different from women. Those equip men for different roles, often for leadership roles, I believe. Obviously, I think women are good at certain types of things. And I would not want to create a society in which unusual women, like, very brilliant women, which certainly there have been such throughout history, I wouldn't want to create a society in which they didn't have the opportunity to exercise their gifts. But I think a society in which women are encouraged to think that they have to have a job in order to be fulfilled, or have to have a profession even. I don't think that is necessarily the best message to give to all women. Many women are not necessarily cut out for cutthroat roles in as lawyers or indeed doctors, as we started off talking about, or even academics. Women tend to take satisfaction in different types of life experiences. They have different values and goals. And what often happens is that the woman gets into, let's say, a law office, and then she's quite upset to realize that she's expected to work late hours for years on end in order to achieve a partnership. And she begins to think that that's a kind of discrimination. And she says that the field should change to accommodate her values and her preferences. Well, then, I don't want a lawyer who has who has made work-life balance her primary goal. I want a lawyer who is a shark. I want a lawyer who's there at the other end of the phone when I call at any time, even on the weekend, and it tends to be that male-dominated professions value that kind of excellence and that sort of competitive drive more than female dominated ones do. So I think there are all sorts of ways in which women and men are not equal at all. And we need to recognize that and exploit the strengths of each sex and figure out ways of dealing with the weaknesses of each sex. And as I said already, we do that with men. We recognize men's strengths and weaknesses, or at least we recognize their weaknesses and we exploit their strengths. And I don't think we do that with women. So I want a more honest conversation about the ways in which men and women are not equal and should not be socially engineered to be equal. So that's kind of my anti-feminism. But I don't have a definite end goal. Like people will say to me, so do you think women should be mainly back in the home? And I'm not really sure. And I don't even know if that's possible. Like I do think like children do need somebody in the home, I think. And it tends to be the mom who's the one best suited for that and maybe who enjoys it the most, although obviously fathers have an important role to play too. So I'm not sure about everything, but I'm more sure of what I object to in feminist ideology than what the perfect outcome would be. But I think the best outcome would be a society in which men and women work together to build strong families and strong societies that allow each sex to do the things that they're best suited to do.
I agree with that. And it's interesting because there's actually like I don't know if you're familiar with these ideas, but like the trad wife trend and like
Mm.
it's like some actually like 32-year-old lawyer who's like, okay, well actually I want to be a wife and a mom, and it's just like maybe feminism didn't tell me the whole story, and like there's kind of like um a trend where it's going back. Like if the men are starting to be like, okay, feminism's not like what it was promised, I understand. But when it's actually women who are going against it, it's more surprising. Well,
Mhm.
surprising,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah, and potentially quite powerful because I
Yeah.
think there probably are a number of, maybe quite a lot of women who have that feeling, and yet they feel like they can't act on it because
Mm,
there's so much social pressure to live out the feminist ideal. And if
mm,
they see other women doing it, then that's certainly going to perhaps inspire other women to, do the same thing. And yeah, it's really interesting. Like I haven't delved deeply into the whole trad wife philosophy or the practice of it, but it's interesting. There's two things about that. One, in the circles that I often frequent, like the sort of what they call the manosphere,
mhm,
dissident, men's networks. There's some men who are a bit resentful. They feel, that the trad wife phenomenon is really just another way that women are being parasitical on men, because
mhm,
they're sort of saying, in some cases, maybe I want to stay at home and bake cakes and do nice things, and the man is expected to man up and have the serious job that's going to support both himself and his wife and any children they have. And so I think there's a tendency among some men to say, well, this is just another form of inequality where the woman gets to decide what kind of life she wants to have, and the man just has to work himself into an early grave to support it. So some of them are not that keen on it. And I think in some ways, like I'm torn. I empathize with those guys actually, but at the same time, I think it's too early to start criticizing if those women legitimately want to live that life, and if that life involves sincerely wanting to make a beautiful home, and to nurture her man, and to love him and to support him in all sorts of ways. Like my mom supported my dad, through the domestic economy. My mom made clothes for me and even for my dad. And I mean, she did all sorts of things. Obviously, she cooked a lot of wonderful meals and kept the house clean and saved my dad money and helped him in his work. He was a commercial fisherman. So I think the trad wife phenomenon can be really positive. A lot of guys do want a wife who's more traditional and who looks after the home. And if the two of them want it and they can make it work, then I wouldn't criticize it at all. The other thing is that the only problem with it that I see, kind of from a men's issues perspective, is that we're going to have to change the divorce laws and the child custody laws if that's going to have any meaning. Because as it is now, a woman can decide she wants to be a trad wife, and 10 years in, she decides she doesn't want to be a trad wife. She wants to divorce her husband and live off the child support and alimony payments that he's going to be forced to make. Then it hasn't really changed anything for the better at all. It's just given another way in which women can exploit men's labor. And I think a man has to know that if he marries and his wife quits working or never works at all, he has to know that he is not going to lose everything he worked for and lose access to his children if she suddenly decides that she doesn't want him anymore. So I really think we need a serious reevaluation of the notion of child custody. We need to recognize a man's right to parent his own children, except in cases of abuse. We need to be very careful about assuming that the mother is the one who should be able to look after the children, because I think children need the father, and the father needs to know that he has the right to parent his own children. That's not going to be taken away from him. So there's that whole aspect of what's happened to divorce. I think we need to do away with a no fault divorce.
Mhm.
Which is good. That's opening a huge can of worms. But, as it is now, any woman can decide. And you pointed out yourself, I think it's something like 70 to 75% of divorces are initiated by women. So this is a big problem for men. And I want, if the woman decides she just wants to leave and there's no reason why, then I think we have got to have a system whereby the man then is not forced to pay for her to leave him
Or go to
with her
jail.
children. Yeah,
Yeah.
or go to jail. Like it's incredible that that's what we've done. And yeah, I don't think you should have a contract that one party can then break and not lose by it. If she wants out of that marriage and for no reason other than that she wants out, well, then she's going to have to recognize that, she's not going to be able to just keep living off her husband's money.
Yeah.
And that, I think a lot of women they're applauded for that. It's like it's a blow for women's rights that women divorce their husbands and then he has to keep paying for them. So all of that needs to be rethought and, reformed.
Hmm. It's man, the thing is, you think you're helping women by allowing them to just receive money for work that they didn't do, but it's actually like not helpful because they're saying like she has no job and stuff like that. Well, she can get a job, and the thing is like. What are you teaching people by saying like, oh no, we're gonna have this portion of society pay for you, and we're gonna force them to, and it's just like you don't have to do anything. It's like that's not a good way to live. And like you said, like the reason why some women might hit their husband maybe because they're like that, like they're just more aggressive. But sometimes just because we did not taught them to not do that,
That
basically.
too.
And
Yeah. Hmm.
this whole socializing thing, it's like to a certain point, it's true. And yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I think women are now actually being socialized into violence.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because it's everywhere
Mhm.
on TV and in movies where
Oh
got all these women that are very supposedly super violent, super capable to fight, and even cases where they'll do things to men, slap them, uh, kick them in the groin, all that, and it's often played for laughs, as if it's really funny and wonderful when a woman is physically violent to a man. And I mean, that's so wrong in so many different ways. One, because men should not be laughed at when a woman is beating on them. And two, it's actually makes it far more likely, again, as I said before, that the man will hit the woman back as she deserves. If she's wailing away on him, well, naturally he's going to. Some men won't. I mean, some men will do almost anything not to hit a woman because it's so deeply ingrained in them that they don't want to. But other men will hit back, and then the woman is likely to be quite seriously injured. So it's a crazy kind of, it's like a feminist idea that women should be physically violent towards men, that should be encouraged. And yet, if the man hits back, that's a terrible thing, and he should go to prison for that. So, yeah, like our socialization is just so wrong. It's like we're deliberately trying to bring out the worst in women rather than bring out the best in them.
yeah.
Yeah.
And but do you see I've read that a new college in Florida abolished the gender studies and permanent alimony, uh, thanks to Ron DeSantis. But is that a good example of a culture shift? And like, do you see this movement expanding? So I think I see that a little bit.
Yeah, maybe this should be our last point.
Yeah,
We can end on a sort of a high note. I don't know. Like,
yeah,
I'm not sure. I don't want to be one of these Eeyores who always claims that the sky is falling. And I do agree that, yeah, there are those, like, there are signs of pushback. There are certain red states that are trying to roll back some of the, crazy like DEI hiring and that kind of thing, and indeed, especially the gender studies ideology. Ironically, in a way, I think the straw that broke the camel's back when it came to gender ideology is the notion that transgender, is that a man can actually become a woman, or a woman can actually become a man. And a lot of feminists have said, oh, hold on, we don't want to give up our privileges to men.
yeah,
And so there's been a split in feminism. Some portion of feminists very much support transgender ideology as a logical extension of feminist ideology, and other feminists say it's the opposite. And so they're sort of having an internal war over the transgender phenomenon. So that's interesting, and I think a lot of men have been able to get on board because they're saying, I don't want, my daughter to have to change next to a, male to female transgender girl or woman, or actually, boy or man. So that the whole transgender thing has mobilized a lot of conservative men who felt that they couldn't speak out against gender ideology otherwise. So that's kind of interesting. And uh, I'm not sure though. Like I'm also quite concerned about things that are going on. For instance, I did a piece not too long ago about the move in various English-speaking countries to identify anti-feminism as a form of violent extremism.
yeah.
That really worries me. Like in Canada, we've already got this notion that incels are all potential terrorists and that they should be put on watch lists, that if they commit any form of violence, they should be punished more harshly, that their ideology is necessarily one that is so egregious and so damaging that it should be censored, and they should be made to feel like pariahs in their society. And I just think it's counterintuitive. It is ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous to claim that any young man who objects to feminism is somehow a danger to his society. Obviously, violence is not a good thing, but the number of incels who have actually become violent is tiny. It's minuscule, and that's never mentioned. It's always mentioned as if, there's just all these young men waiting to shoot up a school. And it simply is not the case. You could say the same thing. You could say that Valerie Solanas, who wrote the Scum Manifesto and did actually try to kill Andy Warhol, who advocated violence against men and did actually shoot 3 men, or 2, maybe. I think the gun misfired with the third attempt. She shot Andy Warhol twice. She shot his, I think, his photographer or his art critic. I forget who, but anyway, she did. She carried out violence in the service of her feminist ideology. So, are we going to say that all feminists and all feminism is violent extremism? I would say, yeah, it is. But I'm not saying that they should be put on watch lists and prevented from publishing on the internet and prevented from having discussions about their views. But that's what they want for anyone who objects to their ideology. And the fact that that is not just an idea, but it's actually getting traction amongst governments, especially in the UK and Australia and New Zealand, which are just feminist crazy, but in Canada as well, and it'll eventually spread to the United States. That I find really worrisome, and seems to me, just a clear a danger for free speech and for our ability to even talk about feminist ideology. So on the one hand, yeah, I think there's some good things going on.
No.
I'm really glad to see that more and more younger men are just saying, hold on, this is crazy. Future is female. What about me? What does that mean for me? What does that mean for my younger brother and for the sons I'm going to have? That's not equality. I'm really glad that men are saying that, because for way too long men have deferred to women's shaming tactics, and they've gone along with things that women have advocated, even though they've been really damaging for men and for society as a whole. So I guess I'm guardedly hopeful,
Nice.
and that's what I write for. I think really is not that I think I am going to convince anybody who is a feminist, but I hope to hearten anti-feminist people who disagree with feminism. And I have women readers as well. Like, there are definitely other women out there who hate feminism and think it's really stupid and destructive and hate what it's doing to women. So yeah, I write to make those people, just to encourage them to hold to their beliefs.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. It's been a nice session. I took a
Yeah,
lot of
thank
notes.
you.
And
Thank you.
oh,
I really appreciate it. I appreciate it. It was lovely to meet you and to talk to you.
absolutely. I wanted to talk about literature, but maybe another time we can do this. But
Yeah,
Ver, thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure.
thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Have a nice day. Thank you.